This message is brought to you by the Racial and Cultural Diversity Commission.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
I was a freshman in college at that time, and when I got the news that Dr. Martin Luther King had been assassinated, I was devastated. It was like the world was standing still at that particular moment.
Here we are with RFK getting assassinated, and then the next thing you know, you have the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King.
I was attending Ridge Road Junior High School, and they came over the speaker system, and I believe they told us all that we needed to get home very quickly. There was a lot of talk about that time that there might be some problems.
It was more like rage and outrage of that someone so pure and so charismatic could be taken away from us in such a horrendous way by a white person. And really that, back in the day, that kind of spawned me into, you know, red, black, and green, and the militants and those kind of things for a while.
There was a variety of emotions. All of them was sorrowful, but there was anger and hostility from some, and then there was compassion of the thought of him being dead, shot. It was high emotions.
The fact that Dr. King's last speech and appearance was in Memphis to support the sanitation workers, to help the employees get better salaries, better benefits. And we've all gotten that. We've gotten that because of Dr. King, because of his struggle.
This city will respect the dignity of labor. So often we overlook the worth and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth.
He was the right man at the right time. But Dr. King was not only the visible expression of the civil rights movement, he was the oracle of the civil rights movement. And he was able to move people who listened to him just by his oratory, backed up by his faith, and just all those terrible things that were occurring. He maintained his persistent belief that peaceful nonviolence was the key to success in that endeavor, with persistence.
You can never whip these boys if you don't keep you and them separate. I found that out in Birmingham. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
I remember seeing those on television, the attacks by those German Shepherd dogs on many of the marches, and just how heinous that picture was and how frightening it was to me.
What Dr. King did was to come along and to build a bridge between both races, a race, the majority race that did not feel like the minority race was worthy, I guess, of being a part of the game.
I was really, really touched by the Children's March, in which young people, children and youngsters committed themselves to this cause, and by and large committed themselves to nonviolence, which is pretty incredible when we think about young people and how these children and young people had this incredible consciousness about themselves, so much so they were willing to sacrifice themselves and go to jail because they understood that what they were doing in this moment was going to have an impact on their future.
He has promoted tolerance. He brought down a barrier that has changed mankind. It's changed the world. He's brought together color and culture and love and hope.
Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights.
He started that dialogue. He pushed that dialogue forward, and he made it a national and international issue where we couldn't ignore it. And this country had to face a lot of hard realities and is still facing some of those realities today.
Just think how he must be sitting in heaven in awe of who is sitting in the White House right now. And because he has brought people together and on one agenda, then it's amazing to see how far we have come. Now, we still have a long way to go, but at least we know we have made progress.
I believe Dr. King's greatest accomplishment as a civil rights leader came, of course, in posthumous fashion in 1986, when Martin Luther King Day was finally recognized as a national holiday. I believe it is a recurring reminder of his philosophy in the civil rights movement.
I was born in 1978. My first boss was African American. When I was in 7th grade, I was a page at the State House of Representatives for my state representative, and he was African American. If I had been born just 20 or 30 years earlier, I don't know that African Americans would have been in those positions. But I grew up in a world in which it was normal for me to see African Americans in positions of leadership and positions of responsibility, and I'm glad I got to live in that world.
Stop! What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
I'm not going to allow anybody to pull me so low as to use the very method that has perpetuated evil throughout our civilization. I'm sick and tired of it. I'm tired of the war in Vietnam. I'm tired of war and conflict in the world. I'm tired of shooting. I'm out of hate.
It's so hard to know exactly how Dr. King has changed the world. He has certainly changed the world in the very obvious ways. So oftentimes we tend to think, or at times people tend to kind of mark Dr. King as a black leader. But he was so much more than that, and he was concerned about so much more than issues among black people. He was a global leader. He had a global concern. He was a humanitarian.
Dr. King stated that nonviolence is a sword that heals. And someone that has experienced armed conflict in Afghanistan, I think I can understand what he meant, because anytime we use violence to accomplish our goals and what we want, I think we lose a little bit of our humanity.
We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed.
The two pieces of work from Dr. King that has impacted my life the most is probably the letter from Birmingham jail. It was written by Dr. King when he was in one of the most vulnerable and undesirable positions a person could be in. And he didn't have the luxury of modern conveniences, historical references, the internet, but yet he wrote one of the most prolific pieces of literature that students today probably are exposed to, and probably students from years to come. What I grabbed from that was any adversity can be overcome by education. Racism, abuse, poverty, any of that can be overcome through education.
I think that Dr. King and the entire civil rights movement, that the inspiration that I can take from that as a city employee is to try to always be inclusive, to think of diversity and to think outside of my little box of who I am. And that means diversity of color, of ethnicity, of religion, of class, of even of sexuality. I think that we have a lot of inequality still in this country today, and that we need to continue that discussion. But I think that for me, working at the zoo, that I always try to think of ways to include more people, to reach out to other communities and to bridge gaps.
You think about, here's a man that had a vision, and we talk about the Americas, and we talk about living in the United States, and we talk about the Constitution of the United States, and you talk about how everyone should be treated equally. And as a race of people, that didn't happen. He fought for those issues, and I think that's commendable in itself.
And thinking back to when I first heard about Dr. King and his legacy was back when I was in grade school. And the philosophy that he had dealing with nonviolence, it put an imprint in my mind that as I got older, the seed kind of grew. So I found myself a lot of things that I deal with people, and yeah, I could handle it in a violent sense. However, the legacy that he lived, not just preached, but he lived, it affected me. And I understand now that being violent, whether that's verbally or physically, is not the way to handle situations.
It opens up our hearts and our minds to know that we are human. And if we look at everyone as human and not their race, and go by the character, the reflection that we bring into a room, into our home, into others' lives.
I have just had a very fruitful and meaningful hour with President Johnson to discuss some of the vital and important issues of our nation in the area of civil rights. I might say that in the very beginning I congratulated the President for the passage of the new voting bill, knowing that he had worked so passionately and unrelentingly for this bill, and made it very clear to him that this would be a great step forward in removing all of the remaining obstacles to the right to vote.
And Dr. King made a lasting impression on me. That was in those early days in the mid-60s, that experience of watching Dr. King operate led me to choose to pursue a degree in political science so I could become a change agent in government. It's my belief that every person in any aspect of public service, whether it be at the local government level, the county level, state, federal, should have the opportunity to read and understand what happened in the 60s and in the 70s and the struggles that are still going on today, so that we are able to deliver services without regard to the audience, but with regard to the need.
Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence has affected my life tremendously, and that being that I try to promote justice, equality, peace and harmony, first within my home, among my family members, in my community, workplace and abroad.
I know all of you are studying hard and you're just doing fine in school, and I'm glad to see you.
In the last 2 months of his life, Dr. King faced the idea that civil rights alone could not solve the problem of poverty.
In Mississippi today. Okay, thank you for doing it.
He roamed the South, trying to gain support for Poor People's Campaign. Its goals: full employment, a guaranteed income, and decent housing for every American.
People just don't know, but it's really hard. Not only me, it's so many more in the same shape. I'm not the only one. It's just so many of us right around. It's just don't have shoes, clothes. It's naked and hungry. Part time you have to cook your children pinto beans morning, down, and supper. They don't know what else get a good meal.
You all are really to be admired. And I want you to know that you have my moral support. I'm going to be praying for you. I'm going to be coming back to see you. And we are going to be demanding, when we go to Washington, that something be done, and done immediately, about these conditions.
At 5 months, I was given up for adoption, and had been on a search for about 25 years to find my biological mother. I always wanted to know where I came from. This Mother's Day, I confirmed that I had found her. And so, 42 years later, the kid that she gave up, never thought she'd see again, didn't know what happened to him, just kind of pops up. It's turned out well, but it didn't have to be this way, and I feel a tremendous responsibility to give back as a result of what I've been given.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creeds. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
People have been recording history for centuries and centuries, but how many times has that history repeated itself and we didn't learn those lessons? Thanks to Dr. King, we finally learned the lessons that we should have learned long, long ago about injustice.
As public servants, we have to remain vigilant to be loyal to the and remember those lessons that he taught us of judging people on the quality of their character, not on the color of their skin or their race or their sex or their national origin or their faith or absence of faith.
The word that I would use to sum up Dr. King would actually be a prophet. A prophet is somebody that tells what's coming, what's to come. And so many people were living in the right now during the movement, but most people didn't see what was down the road. And I think he saw 50, 60 years down the road that most people didn't see. If you would have asked somebody during the movement, would we ever have an African-American president of the United States? Most people would have said no, and probably everybody, black and white, would have said never. But look at us now.
The word that I would use to sum up Dr. King is visionary. I think that he had a vision that was tremendous. It was a vision that he fought for, and it was something that he was able to show. And I think if you can show a vision, you can change reality, and he was able to do that.
He's a hero. He is an absolute hero. And if I were to use a phrase, I would say that Dr. King is the personification of love, of dedication, of perseverance, of courage.
This morning, the long-awaited mandate from the United States Supreme Court concerning bus segregation came to Montgomery. This mandate expresses in terms that are crystal clear that segregation in public transportation is both legally and sociologically invalid.
Dr. King, in my mind, taught us that we really are better together. And in a world where most everything was separate prior to Dr. King's coming onto the scene and the marches and et cetera, things had been by and large separate, and they were by and large separated by color. But what Dr. King did was to come along and say that even though we are different colors, there is a greater purpose that we can achieve if we would all come together. There's strength in unity.
Now, what will be our mode of action in the light of this decision? After thinking through this question very seriously, the Executive Board of the Montgomery Improvement Association recommends that the 11-month-old protest against the city buses will be called off, and that the Negro citizens of Montgomery, Alabama will return to the buses on a non-segregated basis.
It's just remarkable to me that he was able to persist. What a man of quality, what a man of character.
If I could sum Dr. King up in one word or phrase, I would simply use the term equalizer.
There are only a few people in the past that I would ever want to meet, and he's one of them. Just to come in contact with someone who was so disciplined and obedient to his assignment. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to do what he did when no one else would do it. He sacrificed time with his family, his freedom, his life to bring us to where we are today. If I could say something to Dr. King today and he could hear me, I would say, thank you, brother.
I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. But I have a dream today.
If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness. This morning, the thing that I like about it, by giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great. Because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics in physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace. Soul generated by love. You can be that servant.